can't believe I'm actually writing this. I've never really posted on Reddit before, but I guess this is as good a place as any to get my story out there. Maybe someone can help. Maybe someone can stop him. I don't know. All I know is I'm scared out of my mind, and I have to tell someone what's happening before it's too late. It all started a few weeks ago. I was in a really dark place. My girlfriend had just dumped me, I lost my job, and I was pretty much drowning in debt. I was desperate and stupid. I was spending a lot of time on the internet, trying to escape reality. And that's when I stumbled upon a forum on the dark web. It was like a rabbit hole I couldn't get out of. The forum was filled with all kinds of sick and twisted stuff. People talking about their darkest fantasies, illegal activities, you name it. And that's where I found the post. Someone was offering to hire out a killer clown. It was supposed to be a joke, but I wasn't in the right state of mind to see it that way. I thought about my ex and all the people who'd wronged me, and in my twisted, desperate state, it seemed like the perfect solution. The guy's name was Mr. Chuckles. The ad was simple, just a few lines about hiring a clown for special services. I figured it was a scam, but I was curious. I sent a message, half expecting to never hear back. But within an hour, I got a reply. Mr. Chuckles asked for my address and a target. I thought it was all a joke, so I played along. I gave him my ex's address, thinking it would be funny to scare her a little. I paid the fee in Bitcoin, thinking it was just a prank. But then things got real. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of my ex, taken from outside her bedroom window. My heart stopped. I didn't know what to do. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. I drove over to her place, but she was gone. Her apartment was a mess, like there had been a struggle. I found blood on the floor, and that's when I knew I'd made a huge mistake. I went back home, trying to figure out what to do. That's when I got another text. This time, it was a picture of me, taken from outside my own window. I looked out, but there was no one there. Panic set in. I knew I was being watched. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing noises, like someone was in the house. I locked all the doors and windows, but it didn't help. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint laugh coming from the backyard. It was a high-pitched, eerie giggle. I grabbed a baseball bat and went to check, but there was nothing there. Just the wind and shadows playing tricks on me, or so I thought. The next morning, I found a clown doll on my front porch. It was dirty and worn, with a sinister grin painted on its face. There was a note pinned to its chest. "You're next." I freaked out. I called the police, but they didn't take me seriously. They thought it was just a prank, some kind of elaborate joke. But I knew better. I knew Mr. Chuckles was real, and he was coming for me. I tried to stay calm, but the paranoia was eating me alive. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. I started seeing clowns everywhere, at the grocery store, on the street, in my nightmares. I couldn't escape them. And then the messages started again. Pictures of me, of my friends, of my family, each one more disturbing than the last. He was toying with me, enjoying my fear. One night, I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. I grabbed the baseball bat and crept downstairs, heart pounding. The door was wide open, swaying in the breeze. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw him. Mr. Chuckles. He was standing in the middle of the street, illuminated by a street lamp. He was tall and thin, with a painted white face and blood-red lips. His eyes were dark and hollow, and his smile was pure evil. I froze, unable to move. He just stood there, staring at me. Then he raised a gloved hand and waved. It was a slow, mocking wave that sent chills down my spine. I slammed the door shut and locked it, but I knew it wouldn't keep him out. He was already inside my head. The next few days were a blur. I barely ate, barely slept. I couldn't go to work, couldn't see my friends. I was a prisoner in my own home, and Mr. Chuckles was always there, just out of sight, waiting. I could hear his laughter at night, echoing through the house. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of him in the mirror, standing behind me, but when I turned around, he was gone. Then, one night, things got even worse. I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed, holding a knife. His grin was wider than ever, and his eyes glinted with malice. I screamed and lunged at him with the bat, but he vanished into thin air. I knew then that I couldn't stay there anymore. I had to run. I packed a bag and left that very night. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove, trying to put as much distance between me and that clown as possible. But no matter where I go, he's always there. lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I can't escape him. I can't escape Mr. Chuckles, so now I'm on the run. My life is a nightmare, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. If you're reading this, please be careful. Don't make the same mistake I did. The dark web is no joke, and neither is Mr. Chuckles. He's real, and he's out there, hunting. And one day, he might come for you too. After leaving my house in a hurry, I found myself driving aimlessly, unsure where to go or what to do next. My mind was racing, filled with images of Mr. Chuckles and the horrors he had already unleashed. I needed to get as far away as possible, but I also needed a plan. I ended up at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The place was a dump, but I didn't care. All I needed was a place to lay low and figure things out. I checked in under a fake name and paid cash, hoping to stay off the grid. I tried to sleep, but every noise made me jump. I kept seeing his face, that evil grin, those hollow eyes. The next morning, I decided I needed to learn more about Mr. Chuckles. I went back to the dark web forum where I'd found his ad, hoping to find some clues. I posted a message, asking if anyone had heard of him or had any information. Most of the replies were jokes or people calling me an idiot, but one message stood out. It was from someone with the username Clown Hunter. Clown Hunter claimed to have encountered Mr. Chuckles before and offered to help me. We arranged to meet in a nearby town. I was skeptical, but desperate. I drove to the meeting spot, a dingy cafe off the highway. I arrived early and waited, nervously scanning the room for anyone suspicious. Eventually, a man walked in and sat down across from me. He was in his late 30s, with a weathered face and a haunted look in his eyes. "You must be Clown Hunter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Call me Jack," he replied. "And yeah, I've had a run-in with that psycho clown. What did you do to get on his radar?" I explained everything, from hiring Mr. Chuckles to the terror that followed. Jack listened quietly, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're in deep shit, my friend. That clown is relentless. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "What does he want?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Fear. Chaos. Death," Jack said grimly. "He's not just a hitman. He's a sadist. He enjoys tormenting his victims before finishing them off. He'll play with you, break you down, make you wish for death." A cold chill ran down my spine. "How do I stop him?" Jack shook his head. "Stopping him isn't easy, but there might be a way. There's a man, an old friend of mine, who knows more about the dark web than anyone. If anyone can help, it's him. But finding him won't be easy." "Where is he?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Last I heard, he was hiding out in a cabin deep in the woods, off the grid. It'll take a few days to get there, and the journey won't be safe. Mr. Chuckles will be watching, waiting for us to slip up." I agreed to go with Jack, knowing I had no other choice. We left the cafe and headed back to the motel to grab my things. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every car that appeared in the rearview mirror sent my heart racing. I kept expecting to see that painted white face, those blood-red lips. We drove for hours, leaving the city behind and heading into the countryside. Jack seemed tense, constantly checking his mirrors and glancing at the GPS. "We need to be careful," he warned. "Mr. Chuckles has a network. He might have people watching for us." As night fell, we found a secluded spot off the highway to rest. We took turns keeping watch, but sleep didn't come easy. The slightest rustle of leaves or snap of a twig had me on edge. At one point, I thought I saw a figure lurking in the shadows, but when I shone my flashlight, there was nothing there. The next day, we continued our journey, driving deeper into the wilderness. The roads were rough, and the GPS signal was spotty at best. Jack seemed to know where he was going, though, and I trusted him. We barely spoke, the tension between us palpable. By late afternoon, we arrived at a small, isolated cabin nestled among the trees. It looked abandoned, but Jack assured me this was the place. We approached cautiously, weapons at the ready. Jack knocked on the door, and after a few tense moments, it creaked open. An old man with a scraggly beard and piercing blue eyes stood in the doorway. He eyed us warily. "Jack," he said, his voice gravelly, "what brings you here?" "We need your help, Frank," Jack replied. "It's about Mr. Chuckles." Frank's expression darkened. He stepped aside, letting us in. The cabin was cluttered, filled with old books, computer equipment, and weapons. Frank motioned for us to sit and then poured us each a drink. "So, you pissed off the clown, huh?" Frank said, eyeing me. "You must be either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," I admitted, taking a sip of the harsh liquor. "Can you help us?" Frank sighed and rubbed his temples. "I can try. But dealing with Mr. Chuckles is no small feat. He's a master of the dark web, a ghost in the system. But he's not invincible. There might be a way to track him, to turn the tables." We spent the next few hours devising a plan. Frank explained that Mr. Chuckles used a series of encrypted networks and hidden servers to communicate and operate. We needed to find a way to disrupt his network, to cut him off from his resources. It was risky, and the chances of success were slim, but it was our only hope. As night fell, we heard strange noises outside the cabin, branches snapping, leaves rustling. We turned off the lights and peered out the windows, but saw nothing. Jack and Frank exchanged worried glances. "He's here," Jack whispered. "He found us?" My heart pounded as we prepared for a confrontation. We barricaded the doors and windows, hoping to buy ourselves some time. The tension was unbearable, every second feeling like an eternity. Then, the laughter started. That high-pitched, eerie giggle that haunted my nightmares. Mr. Chuckles was toying with us, letting us know he was there, waiting. My hands trembled as I clutched my weapon, praying we could make it through the night. The laughter grew louder, more menacing. I knew then that this wasn't just about survival. This was a battle for my soul, a fight against the darkness that had consumed my life. We had to act fast. We had to find a way to stop him before he got to us. The night stretched on, filled with fear and uncertainty. And as the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I knew our fight was far from over. Mr. Chuckles was out there, and he wouldn't rest until he'd claimed his next victim. Dawn brought little relief. The sense of impending doom hung over us like a thick fog. The laughter had ceased, but the silence was even more unnerving. Jack, Frank, and I sat in the dimly lit cabin, the weight of the previous night's terror still pressing heavily on our shoulders. Frank was already working on his computer, tapping away furiously. He explained that we needed to hack into the dark web's encrypted network to find Mr. Chuckles' location. It was a long shot, but it was our only chance. Meanwhile, Jack and I kept watch, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. Hours passed with no sign of the clown. I felt like a trapped animal, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting him to appear at any moment. Then, around midday, Frank let out a triumphant shout. "I've got a lead," he said. "It's a weak signal, but it's something. We need to move fast." Frank had traced an encrypted communication to a nearby abandoned amusement park. The irony wasn't lost on us. A killer clown hiding out in an old amusement park felt like something out of a nightmare. But it was the best lead we had. We packed our gear and set out immediately, driving through the dense forest. The road was narrow and overgrown, the trees closing in around us. The atmosphere was oppressive, the silence broken only by the crunching of gravel under the tires. As we approached the park, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the eerie landscape. The amusement park was a decaying relic of a happier time. Rusted rides, overgrown pathways, and faded signs created an unsettling backdrop. The place was abandoned, but it felt alive with unseen eyes watching our every move. We parked the car and made our way through the entrance, weapons at the ready. We moved cautiously, staying close together. The air was thick with tension, and every creak and groan of the old rides made my heart race. As we ventured deeper into the park, we found signs of recent activity. Footprints in the dirt, discarded food wrappers, and even a few clown dolls similar to the one left on my porch. He was here, somewhere, waiting for us. We reached the center of the park, where the old funhouse stood. It was a massive, dilapidated structure, its once bright colors now faded and peeling. The entrance was a gaping maw, a twisted clown face with a sinister grin. Frank checked his laptop and nodded. "This is it. The signal's coming from inside." We steeled ourselves and entered the funhouse. The air inside was stale and musty, the darkness swallowing us whole. Flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The place was a maze of narrow corridors, distorted mirrors, and creepy animatronics. We moved slowly, every step echoing ominously. Suddenly the funhouse sprang to life. Lights flickered on, illuminating the twisted mirrors and grotesque decorations. Mechanical clowns began to move, their eyes following us, their grins widening. Laughter echoed through the corridors, a chorus of high-pitched giggles that sent chills down my spine. We pressed on, navigating the labyrinth with growing unease. The laughter grew louder, more manic. And then, out of the darkness, he appeared. Mr. Chuckles. He was even more terrifying up close, his face a grotesque mask of white and red, his eyes black voids of malice. He moved with an unnatural grace, like a predator stalking its prey. Jack and I raised our weapons, but Mr. Chuckles was too quick. He lunged at Jack, knocking the gun from his hands and slashing at him with a gleaming knife. Jack screamed in pain, blood spraying across the mirrors. I fired my weapon, but Mr. Chuckles dodged effortlessly, the bullet shattering a mirror behind him. Chaos erupted. Jack was on the ground, clutching his bleeding side, while Frank frantically tried to access the funhouse's security system. Mr. Chuckles turned his attention to me, his grin widening. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered. "You think you can escape?" I backed away, trying to keep my aim steady. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling. "Stay back," I warned. But he just laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the funhouse. Before I could react, Mr. Chuckles threw something at me, a small round object that landed at my feet, a smoke bomb. Thick, acrid smoke filled the corridor, obscuring my vision and making it hard to breathe. I stumbled back, coughing and gasping for air. When the smoke cleared, Mr. Chuckles was gone. Jack was unconscious, bleeding heavily, and Frank was desperately trying to revive him. I felt a surge of anger and fear. We were outmatched, outsmarted, and running out of time. "We need to get out of here," I shouted, grabbing Jack's arm and helping him to his feet. Frank supported him on the other side, and we made our way out of the funhouse, every step a struggle. The park was dark now, the only light coming from our flashlights and the occasional flicker of a ride sparking to life. We reached the car and drove away as fast as we could. Jack was in bad shape, and we needed to find help. But as we sped down the dark road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Mr. Chuckles was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he'd finished his twisted game. We found a small town a few miles away and took Jack to the hospital. Frank and I waited anxiously in the waiting room, every minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, a doctor came out and told us Jack would be okay, but he needed surgery and would be out of commission for a while. Frank and I were exhausted, but we knew we couldn't rest. Mr. Chuckles was still out there, and he knew we were close. We had to finish what we started, to find a way to stop him before he could strike again. That night, we rented a room at a nearby motel and tried to come up with a new plan. Frank worked tirelessly on his laptop, trying to trace the signal we'd found at the amusement park. I kept watch, my eyes darting to every shadow, every movement outside the window. Around midnight, Frank let out a triumphant shout. "I've got him!" he exclaimed. "I found his server. We can shut him down, cut off his network." "Let's do it," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Frank started the process, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But just as he was about to finish, the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. A chilling laugh echoed through the motel, and I felt my blood run cold. Mr. Chuckles had found us. He was here, and there was nowhere left to run. Frank grabbed a flashlight, and we bolted for the door. But it was too late. The clown was already inside, his eyes glinting with malevolent glee. He moved like a shadow, silent and swift. Frank tried to fight, but Mr. Chuckles overpowered him easily, slamming him against the wall. I ran for the window, smashing it open and scrambling out into the night. I could hear Frank's screams behind me, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving, had to get away. I ran through the dark, deserted streets, my heart pounding in my chest. The laughter followed me, a haunting reminder that I was never truly alone. I knew then that Mr. Chuckles would never stop, never rest. He was a relentless force of evil, and I was his prey. I ran through the dark streets, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the distant laughter of Mr. Chuckles echoing in my ears. The town felt like a ghost town, every shadow hiding potential danger. My mind raced, trying to think of my next move. I had to find help, had to warn others. But who would believe me? I stumbled into a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the bell above the door jingling as I entered. The place was nearly empty. Just a tired-looking waitress behind the counter and an old man nursing a cup of coffee in the corner. I must have looked like a madman, wild-eyed and desperate, but I didn't care. I needed help. "Please," I gasped, leaning against the counter. "You have to help me. There's a killer clown after me." The waitress stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. "What? Are you serious?" "Deadly serious," I replied, glancing nervously at the door. "He's already killed my friends. He won't stop until he gets me too." The old man in the corner looked up, his eyes narrowing. "You talking about Mr. Chuckles?" I nodded, my heart sinking. "You know about him?" The old man sighed and set down his coffee. "I've heard stories, seen things I wish I hadn't. If he's after you, you're in a world of trouble, son." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. What can I do? How do I stop him? The old man shook his head. "Stopping him ain't easy, but there might be a way. There's an old legend about a place deep in the woods, a place where dark forces gather. They say if you can survive the night there, you can break any curse, defeat any evil." It sounded like a long shot, but I was desperate. "Where is this place?" The old man scribbled an address on a napkin and handed it to me. "Be careful. It's not a place for the faint of heart." I thanked him and left the diner, clutching the napkin tightly. I knew I didn't have much time. Mr. Chuckles was out there, and he was closing in. I got back in my car and drove towards the address, my mind racing with fear and determination. The road to the woods was long and winding, the trees growing thicker and more menacing as I drove deeper into the forest. The sun had set, and darkness enveloped the landscape. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled around me. I finally arrived at the place the old man had described. It was a clearing surrounded by tall, ancient trees, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers against the night sky. In the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, each one marked with strange, ancient symbols. I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting into my skin. The place felt alive with dark energy, and I could sense that I wasn't alone. I moved to the center of the circle, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope. If I could survive the night here, maybe I could break the curse, defeat Mr. Chuckles once and for all. Hours passed, the darkness pressing in around me. I kept my flashlight on, the beam cutting through the blackness. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. I felt like I was being watched, but I saw nothing. Then, just after midnight, I heard it. The laughter. It started as a faint giggle, growing louder and more sinister. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, trying to pinpoint the source. The laughter echoed through the trees surrounding me, taunting me. Suddenly, Mr. Chuckles emerged from the shadows, his painted face twisted into a grotesque grin. He moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in an instant. I raised my flashlight, shining it in his face, but he didn't flinch. "You think you can escape me?" he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you can break the curse?" I backed away, my mind racing. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" Mr. Chuckles laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I want to see you suffer. I want to break you, piece by piece." I felt a surge of anger and fear. "I won't let you." I swung the flashlight at him, but he dodged effortlessly, grabbing my wrist and twisting it painfully. I cried out, dropping the flashlight. In the darkness, I could feel his cold breath on my face, his grip tightening. "You can't fight me," he whispered. "You're mine." I struggled, kicking and punching, but he was too strong. He threw me to the ground, pinning me down with an eerie strength. I could see his eyes, black and empty, staring into my soul. Just when I thought it was over, the symbols on the stones around us began to glow. A strange, otherworldly light filled the clearing, and Mr. Chuckles recoiled, hissing in pain. I felt a surge of hope, realizing that the legends were true. The place had power, a power that could fight him. I scrambled to my feet, feeling a newfound strength. The light from the stones grew brighter, and Mr. Chuckles screamed, his form flickering like a bad TV signal. I knew I had to keep him within the circle, to use the power of the place against him. I grabbed a stone and hurled it at him, the glowing symbol burning into his flesh. He howled in agony, stumbling back. I kept throwing stones, each one hitting its mark, weakening him further. The light intensified, and I could see his form disintegrating, the dark energy being pulled away. With one final, desperate scream, Mr. Chuckles exploded into a cloud of dark mist, dissipating into the night. The light from the stones faded, and the clearing fell silent once more. I stood there, breathing heavily, my heart pounding in my chest. It was over. I had defeated him. The curse was broken. I left the woods, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I would never forget the horror of Mr. Chuckles. I had faced my darkest fears and come out the other side, but the scars would remain. I drove back to town, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that the nightmare was finally over. But as I looked in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance to strike. I returned to town as the first light of dawn broke, casting a pale glow over the deserted streets. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. The sense of relief was fleeting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, lurking just beyond my sight. I drove to the hospital to check on Jack. He was still in surgery, fighting for his life. I sat in the waiting room, exhausted, but too wired to rest. My mind raced with the events of the past few days. Mr. Chuckles was gone, but the scars he left behind were deep and painful. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, a nurse approached. "You should go home and rest," she said gently. "There's nothing more you can do here." I nodded, knowing she was right. I left the hospital and drove back to the motel. The place felt different now, less threatening but still eerie. I locked the door behind me and collapsed on the bed, too tired to care about the state of the room. I slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares. I saw Mr. Chuckles, his twisted grin and hollow eyes, laughing as he tormented me. I woke up several times, drenched in sweat, the echoes of his laughter still ringing in my ears. When I finally woke up for good, it was late afternoon. I knew I couldn't stay in that town any longer. I had to move on, to put as much distance between myself and the memories as possible. I packed my things and checked out of the motel, paying in cash to avoid leaving a trail. As I drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. The town faded into the distance, but the feeling of being watched didn't. I knew I couldn't escape the past, but I hoped to find some semblance of peace. I traveled for days, staying in different motels, using fake names, and paying in cash. I kept my phone off, afraid that any signal could lead Mr. Chuckles, or whatever was left of him, back to me. I tried to forget, but the memories clung to me like a dark shadow. One night, I found myself in a small town far from where it all began. The motel was shabby but clean, and I felt a strange sense of safety. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The town was quiet, the streets empty. As I walked, I noticed an old church at the edge of the town. It looked abandoned, its doors hanging off their hinges, the windows shattered. Something drew me to it, a sense of unfinished business. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive. I made my way to the altar, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't alone. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Mr. Chuckles, but someone else, an old man with piercing blue eyes and a scraggly beard. "You made it," he said, his voice gravelly. It was Frank. He looked different, worn down but resolute. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I followed you," he replied. "After the hospital, I knew you wouldn't rest until you were sure it was over." I felt a surge of gratitude and fear. "Is it over?" Frank nodded slowly. "Mr. Chuckles is gone, but the darkness he brought isn't. There are others like him, other entities that feed on fear and chaos. We stopped one, but there will always be more." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't the answer I hoped for, but it was the truth. "What do we do now?" Frank smiled, a sad, weary smile. "We keep fighting, we stay vigilant, and we never let the darkness win." As we stood there in the abandoned church, I realized that my life had changed forever. I had faced my worst fears and survived, but the battle wasn't over. It would never be over. But with people like Frank by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. We left the church together, stepping out into the night. The air was cool, and the stars shone brightly overhead. I felt a sense of purpose, a renewed strength. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never stop fighting. The darkness might never be fully vanquished, but as long as there were people willing to stand against it, there was hope. and for the first time in a long while, I felt that hope burning within me. As we walked back to the motel, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. The church stood silent and empty, a relic of a past filled with terror. But it was behind me now. I was moving forward, ready to face whatever horrors the future might bring. Mr. Chuckles was gone, but the memory of his twisted grin would haunt me forever. And that was a reminder that I needed to stay strong, to keep fighting, and to never let the darkness consume me again. Hey Reddit, I'm not really sure where to start with this. I've been lurking here for years, but I never thought I'd be posting my own story. I guess I should start with a bit of background. This all happened about 2 years ago, and it's been a living nightmare ever since. So, like most people my age, I'm 26. I got really curious about the dark web. I'd heard all the horror stories, but a part of me just didn't believe them. I thought it was all just urban legends and exaggerated tales. Boy, was I wrong. One night, I was bored and decided to dive into the dark web. I used a Tor browser and found myself browsing through all sorts of illegal and weird stuff. Drugs, weapons, fake IDs, you name it. Then, I stumbled upon a section for cursed objects. It was like something out of a horror movie. Haunted paintings, cursed jewelry, and of course, dolls. One particular listing caught my eye. Cursed doll, guaranteed to haunt. The description was vague, but it promised that the doll would bring supernatural experiences. It was $50. I thought it would be a fun, spooky decoration for my apartment. Just something to freak my friends out with. I ordered it, not thinking twice about the consequences. A week later, the package arrived. It was wrapped in old yellowing paper and tied with a string. Inside was the doll, about a foot tall, dressed in an old-fashioned, tattered dress. It had a porcelain face with cracked, lifeless eyes and a disturbing smile. It looked exactly like you'd imagine a cursed doll would. From the moment I took it out of the box, I felt uneasy. The air in my apartment seemed colder, and I had this constant feeling of being watched. But I brushed it off, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The first night I had it, I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of whispering. It was faint, like someone was standing just outside my bedroom door, talking in hushed tones. I live alone, so I was immediately on edge. I grabbed a baseball bat and checked the entire apartment, but there was no one there. The doll was sitting on the shelf where I'd left it. Its eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. Creeped out, I shoved it into a closet and went back to bed, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things. The next few days were normal enough, but then things started to get weird. Objects in my apartment began to move on their own. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen counter, only to find them on the living room table later. Lights would flicker, and I'd hear footsteps in the hall when I was home alone. One night, about a week after the doll arrived, I woke up to the feeling of something heavy on my chest. I couldn't move, and when I opened my eyes, the doll was sitting on my chest, staring down at me with that eerie smile. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my side. It felt like something was stabbing me. The pain was so intense that I passed out. When I woke up, it was morning. The doll was back on the shelf, but my side was throbbing. I lifted my shirt to find a deep, jagged wound. It looked like it had been made by a knife. I went to the ER, and the doctors were baffled. They stitched me up and gave me antibiotics, but they couldn't explain how the wound had happened. After that night, the activity in my apartment escalated. The whispers became louder, and I started seeing shadows moving in the corners of my vision. The wound on my side refused to heal. It became infected, no matter what I did. I tried everything. Antibiotics, creams, even home remedies, but nothing worked. The pain was constant, and the wound oozed pus and blood. I tried to get rid of the doll. I threw it in the trash, but the next morning, it was back on the shelf. I burned it, but it showed up in my closet the next day, completely unharmed. I even tried taking it to a church, hoping a priest could help. But as soon as I walked through the doors, the doll started screaming. Not just a doll's scream, but a blood-curdling, human-like scream. I dropped it and ran out of there, and when I got home, it was sitting on my bed. At this point, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. The wound on my side was getting worse, and I was scared it was going to kill me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was a wreck. My friends and family noticed, but I couldn't tell them what was happening. They'd think I was crazy. I started researching curses and haunted objects, desperate for a solution. I tried everything I read about: salt circles, sage smudging, holy water, you name it. Nothing worked. The doll seemed to mock my efforts, its smile growing more sinister with each passing day. That's when I turned to Reddit. I've seen the community here help with some pretty strange stuff, so I'm hoping someone can offer advice. I'm at my wit's end. The wound on my side is getting worse, and I don't know how much longer I can take this. Please, if anyone has any ideas, let me know. I'll try anything at this point. I just want my life back. Alright, I'm back. Thanks for all the responses on my last post. I appreciate the support and the suggestions, even though none of them have worked so far. Anyway, here's what's been happening since my last update. After posting on Reddit, I decided to take a different approach. I needed professional help. I found a local paranormal investigator group and reached out to them. They seemed skeptical at first, but once I showed them the wound and the doll, they agreed to come over. 3 investigators came to my apartment. They set up all sorts of equipment: EMF readers, thermal cameras, voice recorders. It looked like something out of Ghostbusters. The lead investigator, a guy named Mike, did a sweep of the apartment. The EMF reader went haywire near the doll, which didn't surprise me. They tried to communicate with whatever was haunting me. They asked questions, and we all listened intently. At first, there was nothing but static, but then a voice came through, clear as day. "Mine." Everyone froze. Mike asked, "What do you want?" The voice responded, "Blood." I felt a chill run down my spine. The investigators were visibly shaken, but they continued. They tried to perform a cleansing ritual, burning sage and chanting in Latin. The doll seemed to react, its eyes moving as if it was watching us. Then, things got worse. The room temperature dropped dramatically, and a foul stench filled the air. I started to feel dizzy and nauseous. One of the investigators began to cough violently and had to leave the room. Suddenly, the doll flew off the shelf, hitting Mike in the head and knocking him out cold. The others rushed to help him, but as they did, the whispering started again, louder this time, echoing through the apartment. I tried to run, but the door slammed shut in my face. I was trapped. The whispers turned into screams, and the doll was now on the floor, its eyes glowing a sinister red. I felt a searing pain in my side, the wound reopening and bleeding profusely. I fell to my knees, clutching my side, feeling helpless. The investigators managed to drag Mike out of the apartment, and as soon as they crossed the threshold, the screaming stopped. The doll was back on the shelf, its eyes dull and lifeless once more. They told me to get out of there, to leave everything behind, but I couldn't. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let some cursed doll drive me out. Desperate, I started sleeping at friends' places, but it didn't help. The doll always found its way back to me. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find it sitting at the foot of the bed, or standing in the corner of the room, watching me. My friends started to distance themselves, thinking I was losing my mind. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. The wound on my side was now a festering, infected mess. I went to different doctors, but none of them could explain it. They gave me more antibiotics, but nothing worked. It was like the wound had a life of its own, pulsating and oozing no matter what I did. I started to get weaker, my energy sapped by the constant pain and fear. One night, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard a scratching noise. It was coming from the closet. My heart pounded as I got up and slowly opened the door. The doll was there, but this time it was holding a knife, a real, blood-stained knife. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. The doll seemed to move closer, though I couldn't see it actually walking. I grabbed a lamp and threw it at the doll, smashing it to pieces, but it was no use. The doll was untouched, still clutching the knife. I ran out of the apartment, not even bothering to grab my shoes. I just ran, not stopping until I reached a 24-hour diner. I sat there trembling, trying to make sense of what was happening. That's when I decided to go back on the dark web, to the site where I bought the doll. I needed answers. It took me hours, but I finally found the listing again. This time I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small, barely noticeable link at the bottom of the page. It led to a forum where people shared their experiences with cursed objects. I posted about the doll, hoping someone could help. A few hours later, I got a reply from someone claiming to be an expert on curses. They told me that the doll was inhabited by a vengeful spirit, one that feeds on pain and fear. They said the only way to get rid of it was to find its original owner and return it to them. But there was a catch. If the spirit had attached itself to me, returning the doll might not be enough. I was at a loss. I had no idea who the original owner was, and even if I did, I wasn't sure I could find them. But I had to try. The thought of living with this curse for the rest of my life was unbearable. So, I began my search, hoping against hope that I could find a way to end this nightmare. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update. I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they've only gotten worse. Here's what's happened since my last post. After learning that I needed to find the doll's original owner, I spent hours scouring the internet. I reached out to every contact I could find on the dark web, but most of them either ignored me or claimed they didn't know anything. I was starting to lose hope. Then, out of the blue, I got a message from an anonymous user. They claimed to know about the doll and its origins. They said it was once owned by a woman named Margaret who lived in a small town a few states over. The user didn't provide much more information, just an address and a warning to be careful. They said Margaret was known for her dabbling in dark magic, and that the doll was a vessel for a spirit she had summoned. With no other leads, I decided to take a chance. I packed a bag, left a note for my family, and drove to the town. It was a tiny, forgotten place with more abandoned buildings than occupied ones. The address led me to an old, decrepit house on the outskirts. The windows were boarded up, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. It looked like no one had lived there in years. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. I called out, but only my echo responded. I stepped inside, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The house was a hoarder's nightmare. Piles of newspapers, broken furniture, and strange trinkets filled every corner. I made my way through the clutter, my heart pounding in my chest. I found a staircase and carefully climbed up to the second floor. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of whispering, the same whispers I'd heard in my apartment. I followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open. Inside, the room was empty except for a single dusty rocking chair. In the chair sat an old woman, her eyes closed and her hands clasped in her lap. She looked like she was asleep. "Margaret?" I whispered. But there was no response. I stepped closer, and that's when I saw it. The doll was sitting on her lap, its eyes glowing red. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but before I could, her eyes snapped open. They were a milky white, completely devoid of life. "You shouldn't be here," she croaked, her voice raspy and filled with malice. "The doll is mine." I stumbled back, my mind racing. "Please, I need to know how to stop this. The doll, it's killing me." She laughed, a dry, wheezing sound that sent chills down my spine. "You cannot stop it. The spirit is bound to you now. It will never let you go." Desperate, I pleaded with her. "There has to be a way. Please, I'll do anything." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes boring into mine. "There is one way," she finally said, "but it requires a sacrifice, a life for a life." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. "What do you mean?" She smiled, revealing a row of blackened teeth. "The spirit wants blood. You must give it what it craves. Only then will it be satisfied." I was horrified. "You mean I have to kill someone?" She nodded slowly. "Bring the doll a fresh soul, and it will release you. But be warned, the spirit is fickle. If it does not accept your offering, it will take you instead." I left the house in a daze, my mind racing with what I had just learned. I couldn't believe what she was asking me to do. I drove back to my apartment, the doll sitting in the passenger seat, its eyes following me the whole way. Once home, I sat in the dark, contemplating my next move. I couldn't bring myself to kill someone, but I was running out of time. The wound on my side was worse than ever, the infection spreading. I was weak, barely able to get out of bed. One night, in a fevered haze, I decided to try a different approach. I figured if the spirit wanted blood, maybe I could trick it. I went to a butcher and bought a bag of animal blood. That night, I poured the blood over the doll, hoping it would be enough to sate the spirit's hunger. At first, it seemed to work. The whispers stopped, and the air in my apartment felt lighter. I started to feel hopeful, thinking I had found a loophole. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a searing pain in my side. The doll was standing on my chest, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. I felt a cold hand wrap around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. I blacked out, and when I came to, the doll was gone. But the pain was worse than ever. The wound was now a gaping hole, the flesh rotting away. I knew then that there was no escaping this. The spirit wasn't fooled by my trick. It wanted a human soul, and it wouldn't stop until it got one. I'm at my wit's end. I don't know what to do. I can't bring myself to kill someone, but I don't want to die either. The doll is always there, watching, waiting. I can feel the spirit growing stronger, feeding off my fear and pain. Please, if anyone has any other ideas, I'm begging you. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update. Things have taken a turn for the worse, and I'm running out of options. Here's what's been happening. After my failed attempt with the animal blood, I knew I had to find another solution. I couldn't live with the idea of taking an innocent life. But the spirit was relentless. The wound on my side was now a festering, infected nightmare, and I could barely move without excruciating pain. I was desperate, so I decided to reach out to the paranormal community again. I found a forum dedicated to dark magic and curses. Most of the users were skeptical or downright dismissive, but one user, who went by the name Shadow Walker, claimed to be an expert in dealing with malevolent spirits. They suggested a ritual that could potentially bind the spirit to an inanimate object, essentially trapping it and rendering it harmless. It sounded like my best shot. The ritual required some rare ingredients: black salt, a sprig of hemlock, and a vial of graveyard dirt. I spent the next few days gathering everything. My strength was waning, and every moment felt like a struggle. But I had to try. The night of the ritual, I set everything up in my living room. I drew a circle with the black salt, placed the hemlock and graveyard dirt in the center, and sat the doll on top. Shadow Walker had provided an incantation that I was to recite while focusing all my energy on binding the spirit. As I began chanting, the air grew cold and the lights flickered. The doll's eyes started glowing again, and I could hear the whispers louder than ever. My heart pounded, but I kept going, repeating the incantation over and over. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls warping and shifting as if they were alive. Then, suddenly, the doll levitated. It hovered above the circle, its eyes burning with an unholy light. I felt a force pushing against me, trying to break my concentration. I gritted my teeth and pushed back, shouting the incantation with every ounce of strength I had left. For a moment, it seemed like it was working. The doll's glow dimmed, and the whispers faded. But then, a deafening scream filled the room. The force knocked me back, and I hit the wall hard, my vision blurring. The doll fell to the ground, lifeless, but the air was thick with malevolent energy. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body racked with pain. The ritual had failed. The spirit was still there, and now it was furious. I could feel it, a dark, oppressive presence weighing down on me. The wound on my side was burning, the infection spreading like wildfire. In a panic, I grabbed the doll and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out of that apartment. I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town, collapsing on the bed, the doll clutched in my arms. I was delirious with pain and exhaustion, barely able to think straight. That night, the nightmares were worse than ever. I dreamed of Margaret, her milky white eyes staring into my soul, her voice echoing in my head. "You cannot escape," she whispered. "The spirit is bound to you, forever." I woke up drenched in sweat, the doll sitting on the pillow next to me, its eyes glowing faintly. I knew I couldn't keep running. The spirit would follow me wherever I went. I had to face it, to find a way to end this once and for all. I spent the next day researching more about Margaret and the spirit she had summoned. I found an old newspaper article about a series of mysterious deaths in her town, all linked to strange, unexplainable wounds. It seemed that I wasn't the first victim of this curse. One name stood out: a man named Thomas, who had supposedly been Margaret's lover. The article mentioned that he had been the first to die, his body found in her house, covered in strange symbols. I knew I had to find out more about him. Maybe he held the key to breaking the curse. I managed to track down an old address for Thomas's family. It was a long shot, but I had no other leads. I drove to the address, a small, run-down house on the edge of town. An elderly woman answered the door, her eyes filled with sorrow and weariness. She introduced herself as Thomas's sister, and when I explained my situation, she invited me in. Her house was filled with old photographs and dusty mementos. She told me about Thomas and Margaret, how they had been deeply in love, but their relationship had turned dark when Margaret became obsessed with the occult. She believed that Margaret had sacrificed Thomas to summon the spirit, binding it to the doll. She handed me an old journal, Thomas's diary. As I read through it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Thomas had written about Margaret's rituals, her descent into madness, and his growing fear. His final entry was a desperate plea for help, written the night before he died. The last page of the journal contained a drawing of a strange symbol, a pentagram with intricate markings. Thomas wrote that it was a binding symbol, one that could trap the spirit if drawn correctly. It was my last hope. Armed with this new information, I returned to my apartment. I carefully recreated the symbol from Thomas's journal on the floor, placing the doll in the center. I began the ritual again, this time incorporating the binding incantation from the journal. The air grew thick with tension, the whispers returning with a vengeance. The doll's eyes glowed, and I could feel the spirit's rage. I kept chanting, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The symbol began to glow, the lines pulsing with energy. Suddenly the doll convulsed, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged from it. The spirit howled, a sound that pierced my very soul. I focused all my energy on the binding symbol, forcing the spirit into it. The room shook, and I felt a pressure building in my head, but I didn't stop. With one final, ear-splitting scream, the spirit was sucked into the symbol. The doll fell to the ground, lifeless and cold. The air was still, the oppressive presence gone. I collapsed, the pain in my side unbearable. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. The wound on my side didn't heal immediately, but it stopped spreading. Over the next few weeks, I slowly began to recover. The whispers were gone, and the doll remained lifeless. I knew the spirit was trapped, but I didn't take any chances. I buried the doll and the symbol deep in the woods, far from anyone who might stumble upon it. I'm still haunted by what happened, the memories of the pain and fear always lurking in the back of my mind, but I'm free, and for now, that's enough. Hey Reddit, it's been a while since my last update. I wish I could say everything is back to normal, but I've learned that some things can never be undone. Here's the final chapter of my story. After I buried the doll and the binding symbol in the woods, I hoped the nightmare was over. The wound on my side slowly began to heal, though it left a nasty scar. The whispers were gone, and the oppressive presence that had haunted me vanished. I started to rebuild my life, trying to put the past behind me. I moved to a new apartment, hoping a change of scenery would help me forget. For a few months, things seemed to improve. I even started dating again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I might actually be happy. But the peace didn't last. It started with small things. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a cold draft in the middle of summer. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew the spirit wasn't truly gone. One night, I woke up to find the scar on my side burning. I stumbled to the bathroom, turning on the light to see the scarred flesh glowing faintly. I felt a wave of nausea and fear wash over me. That's when I heard it. The whispering. Soft at first, but growing louder and more insistent. I turned to see a dark figure standing in the doorway. It was the spirit, its form more solid and menacing than ever before. The binding symbol had worked, but it hadn't destroyed the spirit. It had only made it angrier. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and frantically searched for Shadow Walker's contact information. I hadn't heard from them since the failed ritual, but I hoped they might have some advice. I sent a desperate message, explaining what was happening. To my surprise, they responded almost immediately. They told me there was one final way to banish the spirit, but it was risky. It involved summoning the spirit into a circle of protection and confronting it directly. If I failed, the spirit would consume me entirely. I had no choice. I gathered the necessary materials, candles, salt, and a piece of iron, and set up the circle in my living room. The whispers grew louder, the air growing colder as I worked. I could feel the spirit's presence, watching me, waiting. With everything in place, I stood in the center of the circle and began the incantation. The spirit appeared, its form twisting and writhing with rage. It tried to break through the circle, but the salt and iron held it back. I could feel its hatred, its desire to destroy me. I forced myself to speak, my voice trembling but firm. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The spirit's eyes burned into mine. "You took her away from me," it hissed. "She promised me eternity, and you ruined it." I realized then that the spirit wasn't just any vengeful entity, it was Thomas. His soul had been twisted by Margaret's dark magic, bound to the doll and consumed by rage. He wanted revenge, not just on me, but on anyone who disturbed his rest. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't know, but this has to stop. You can't keep doing this." The spirit screamed, a sound that shook the walls and rattled my bones. "There is no peace for me, only pain, only rage." Desperate, I reached for the piece of iron, holding it out toward the spirit. "Then let me help you find peace. Let me end this." The spirit recoiled, its form flickering. For a moment, I thought it might actually listen. But then it surged forward, breaking through the circle, the force of its anger overwhelming. I screamed, feeling the spirit's cold grasp around my throat. The room spun, and I could feel my life slipping away. But in that moment of clarity, I remembered something Shadow Walker had said. The spirit feeds on fear. If I could let go of my fear, maybe I could weaken it. I closed my eyes, focusing on the good memories, my family, my friends, the moments of happiness I'd had before all this started. I felt a warmth spread through me, pushing back against the spirit's cold grip. The whispers grew fainter, the pressure easing. When I opened my eyes, the spirit was fading, its form dissolving into nothingness. With one final, ear-splitting scream, it vanished, leaving me gasping for breath on the floor. The room was still, the air clear. The scar on my side no longer burned, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I knew it was over. The spirit was gone, and truly gone this time. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life once more. The nightmares lessened, and the whispers faded into distant memories. I still bear the physical and emotional scars of my ordeal, but I'm stronger for it. I've learned to appreciate the small moments of joy, and to never take anything for granted. And while I'll always carry the weight of what happened, I know I've done everything I can to put it behind me. Thank you, Reddit, for being there through this nightmare. Your support and advice helped me more than you'll ever know. Stay safe out there, and if you ever come across something that seems too good to be true, trust your instincts.